Now, how do you measure success? Well, the success initially for me is about authentic connections, and from authentic connections, it's going to be authentic communications and transactions, which then accrete value.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining in on tonight's webinar. I am Lola Chang and I'll be the moderator for our talk tonight on how your diverse heritage makes you a better leader. So for those of you who are new to us, at PDF we believe that everyone, not just the elite few, should have access to the right tools, techniques and networks to develop themselves. We believe that by becoming the best version of ourselves, we lead a more fulfilling life and inspire those around us to do the same. And we do this by running events that aim to inform, connect and inspire. And we share what we learned with our community on social media. So before we begin, I'd like to lay down some housekeeping rules. So we encourage everyone to please turn on your webcams so we can better connect with each other. If you have any questions at any time throughout the session or would like to comment on anything that was said, then feel free to do so in the chat box, and you'll also be invited to ask your questions throughout the webinar and also towards the end in the Q&A session. Please also note that this session is being recorded and so may be distributed via social media. So tonight we are very grateful to have Ranil Sharma as our speaker. Ranil is a Senior Director at Oracle Utilities, and he previously worked as the General Manager at Telstra and was responsible for strategic growth, consulting, and among other things. So throughout his career, he has worked in many other areas, such as in sales, marketing, and M&A strategy. So as you can see, he's had a very successful corporate career. And today, Ranil will be talking to us about how coming from a diverse background does not have to stand in the way of having a successful corporate career, and that it can actually help you to become a better leader. So without further ado, I will now hand it over to Ranil. Hi, Ranil.
Hi, Lola. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the intro, Lola. And I love what you said, actually, because it's the first time I've heard you do that intro. Many things, but the one thing that jumped out for me there, you said, is that you want to encourage everyone to become the best version of themselves. And then from that place, take that out into not only our workplace, but our lives. And I want to use that as the foundation for what our discussion is going to be today. I mean, as you guys can see, I've got perhaps not the classic Australian background, you know, so I'm Indian heritage. I'm third generation, born in Fiji. I was 5 when we moved to New Zealand, so all of my schooling and university was in New Zealand. When I was in my first year of university, my family moved across to Australia. And this will age me a little bit, but in the 80s, New Zealand's economy wasn't that great. So like a lot of Kiwis and Australians, I had these dreams that when I finished university, I would go off and travel the world. I had family all over the world, as we Indians tend to do. And so I'd look for what career opportunities were available to me. Primarily, it was going to be either in Australia or in North America at that time was what I was thinking. So when my family moved to Australia, I came over here in all of my summer holidays, and I'd be, you know, within, like most people with an Asian background, there's a lot of get up and go. In fact, it gets up and drags me along before I realize it. So within a few days of getting here, being at university, I was self-funding, even though there was a government funding program over there. So I was keen to, you know, get some work, make some money, save some money, take it back for when I go back to university. And I'd have 2 and 3 jobs organized within a few days of being here. And so I'd spend, I guess, all of those holidays, probably a good year before I finished university, embedded in, primarily in Melbourne, in the work environment, and getting kind of blown away by the diversity of not only cultural, but also business that I found here. Because the population of Melbourne was the same as the population of New Zealand. You know, so for me, it was like, wow. And New Zealand had some diversity culturally, but not in the same way. I mean, I grew up with a lot of Pacific Islanders. I grew up with, you know, limited Indians, limited Asians. There were some Europeans, but you know, very few, not large clusters of Italians and Dutch and English and Scottish. There's probably a lot of English and UK background in New Zealand. So, you know, here I am in Melbourne going, oh my gosh, look at all of these people, look at all of these jobs, look at how they interact. And it was amazing. So I thought I was quite flexible and aware of different people, but there was so many more I came across here that it kind of left me excited, but also bewildered, you know, trying to understand, oh, wow, you guys think like this, and this is normal for you versus how my family was versus the families I grew up in. And then also what the work environment was like, because the professional environment in New Zealand was very different here. And when I first moved across to Australia, and my first professional job, if you like, career job, I did some contract work here and there because, again, that Asian sort of work ethic meant I couldn't just come and sit around. I'd be working until I found a career job. And my first career job was actually with Telecom Australia. It was, as it was still called then. 1990, I started with Telecom Australia. It was in 91, something like that. And the first environment I was in, I found such a challenge. You know, I found just the language, the way that the people in that environment interacted, left me feeling very much an outsider. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to manage this? And if this is what the Australian professional work environment's like, how am I going to cope? Maybe I'm in the wrong country, maybe I'm in the wrong city, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. And, you know, and I was in that group for probably 18 months. And there's a few guys that came into that had a different educational background, that had a different historical, you know, like a cultural background. They were maybe more white Australians versus ethnic Australians versus more blue-collared Australian backgrounds. And all of a sudden I started realizing, well, hold on a moment. Maybe it's more than this. And so that's where I kind of started. That was the first time I'd ever felt uncomfortable in an environment and with a group of people, to this extent where I started to question, can I be me? Can I be successful? What will it take? And that was a good learning, actually, because I don't know about you guys, but typically my experience of Asian cultures is we're very wired, we're driven, we want to get in there and be successful and just make it all happen yesterday. You know, when we're here, come on, point us in the right direction and away we'll go. And you know what? That's a very linear approach to performance and outcome and success. And I started to realize that life isn't linear. You know, business isn't linear. People are not linear. You can't, you know, just do this and get there. We're multidimensional. So how is it that we're going to pull together a learning, and how do I get away from what I know and start to be open to what I need to know, what I need to learn, you know, and get more about embracing curiosity and questioning rather than speaking and answering. Because, you know, that's in my history, it was about your competency was based on what you could speak and show, you know, and that's not really productive in a business environment all the time. Because, you know, Australians will just call you a smart ass. And the fact that you actually know what you're talking about is irrelevant. You know, these are the multi-dimensional pieces. So what I would like to do is, firstly, invite any of you, if you have questions, to just put them on the forum, on the chat, and I'm going to check in with Lola from time to time. And if there's any questions that are worth asking or answering based on what I've said today, I'll address them then. And then otherwise, we've got a more formal section at the end. But, you know, I'm not really into the formal stuff. I think we want to tailor this experience for what you can get most out of it. Because, I mean, I'll just keep crapping on, you know. You may be bored, which we don't want to do that, do we? So what I thought I'd do, given that we're talking about cultural experience, and that was a little bit of a toe in the water of how I started here, maybe we can put some structure around what does cultural intelligence mean. So I'm just going to share now just some slides that I put together. And hang on. Here we go. And from this place, let's have a chat and put some structure around what is cultural intelligence and how does that apply to each of us? Because we've all got our own view, but cultural intelligence is actually a science and management strategy at the moment, has been for a while. And as you can see here, if you look at an Oxford Dictionary definition of culture, it talks about the ideas and customs and the social behaviors of a particular group of people or a society. And that's really critical and important for us because every group has an identity and a culture. And it isn't necessarily, from my point of view, to do with racial culture. Whilst all of us here are multiracial and multicultural in that way, every single group, whether it be one person or one particular group, one division, one organization, has its own culture. And you'll have cultures within cultures. Those of you who've been in tier ones and in Telstra, you'll know this, right? Some groups have just got a great vibe. Things work, and other groups you just don't want to even be in the same room with, let alone in the same project with. So these cultural nuances go beyond just our history, our personal and genetic histories. You know, we need to take into account what's happening organizationally and the dynamics of each group there. So taking it further, what does that really mean here? Definition. So obviously we've got to be able to work together. There is a science to it. And you know what? We need to master this communication and create those relationships, both, and I want to say create because ultimately our environment is co-created by ourselves. So if we're not comfortable in the way something is happening around us, then we haven't identified what our contribution is to not make that work properly. So we need to be curious. And I'll come back to this because, you know, ultimately everything in our life is just that. It's our life. We're the center of that. And if you extend that further, this next point that, you know, we all know about IQ. EQ has been a big movement in management strategy for probably 25 years now. And CQ is an extension of that in terms of how we take that into groups, typically with racial cultures, but obviously within organizational cultures as well. It's been academically validated, but it's also a soft skill and it can be measured. And like anything, if it can be measured, it can be improved, which is what we're here for in terms of development. It's a professional development forum, a personal development forum. How do we measure our own success or our own movement? Very good. So if I then, and excuse the slideware, but again, if we have some context, the discussion should hopefully flow a bit better. These are the components, you know, that in CQ, according to a group called Chameleon. And I like a lot of the work they do. You guys can read this. You can see the 4 areas: the drive, the knowledge, the strategy, and the action. And these are some of the structures that help to quantify it. And then from the quantification, you can start to get a sense of where you're at in each of these, and then obviously look to move the dial. Now, so what does that mean? I mean, all of us are here because I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, so please put in your comments why you actually are here and what you want to get out of today. But we're here for our own personal growth. However, really critical, if you're here for your growth and your career success, then it's important to understand the organization you're in, whether it's your own company and you're an entrepreneur and what you want to create versus a tier 1 global and what do they want to do. So what are the benefits of having a culturally intelligent group or diverse group? So here's some things that I liked. Firstly, most organizations are beginning to realize that culture is the game. And, you know, IBM, of all people, if they can start talking about this, and that was their catch cry, you can look at some of these metrics here. These are some of the metrics that multinationals start to use. There are many, many others that are being formulated now as a result of our globalization and economies of scale. So not only people moving, but also outsourcing, business process, flexible models. We're starting to get many different outcomes and services delivered by more diverse groups of people. And what appears to be a standalone business case, many organizations are realizing after probably 20 years of outsourcing that nothing is that simple. Some are done better than others. And how can you quantify that? And it's not only your service providers, whether it's an outsource or new employees. If you think about new employees as service providers, it's not just on them to deliver. As organizations, as leaders, we need to learn from and understand how to maximize the investment, whether it's in an individual or in an organization as an outsource or as an organization as a partner, whatever our relationship is. How do we also develop ourselves and morph to get the outcomes that we're looking for? Why does it matter? There we go. So these are typically the organizational outcomes that most companies are starting to realize they need to look at. So what are the three areas that typically work really well? And this is a international consulting center approach, and it just keeps it simple. You know, what can we keep an eye on rather than I have to do a thesis and here's these 200 pages of things that I have to try and do? High level, what are the things that I want to be aware of inside myself? And then if you want to take that down to the next level, back to these four areas, what are some of the functional components day to day and where do they fit? You know, motivation, it's got to be intrinsic and extrinsic, right? And it's got to be all about how do I do it myself, but how do I enable that? So just a framework there that's a commonly accepted framework. But what I really want to do is take all of that and bring it to this piece here, because the key thing in all of this is this middle piece. Ultimately, our experience of the world is all about us individually. What do we need to be that's going to get us culturally aware? Well, I mean, intelligence you guys appreciate, EQ you guys are aware of. It's, you know, understanding the dynamics of what's in play with the person in front of you, reading between the lines, having a sense of their energy and their vibe and their thoughts and their feelings. And it's more about effective communication and understanding. And CQ extends that to a group. However, at a personal level, what are the things that we need to do? We've spoken about curiosity. We've got to be curious. We've got to look to understand. And really, you know, the biggest thing in all of this is about humility. You know, and I'll bring it back to my example. It's not what we know and what we want to add. It's what do we need to know? What do we need to ask? What can we understand more of in order to engage in a new culture and in a new group, and also bring the uniqueness of me and my culture, and they can be different. My culture is one thing and I'm another thing, and there's an overlap. How do I bring that into a group? How do I engage in that group? How do I find out about that group? And it's a two-way equation, you know. Many people I've spoken to have spoken about being outsiders in a group and expecting that group to embrace them and learn from them. And my question to them was, well, how have you embraced them and how have you learned from them and what have you learned from them? And how is it changing who you are day to day in engagements with them and in your life? Because you know what, if we're not going to do it, why should someone else do that? So we're at the center of everything, and this continuous learning is more than a word. Everything's got to reflect in actions. So I might take a quick stop and just see if there's any questions there, because for me, I covered a couple of important things that may not have mattered much to you guys. But let me check in. Lola, how are we going?
There is one question sent in by Robert. Robert, can you unmute your mic so that you can ask your question?
Oh, you want me to ask it? Okay. Would you define professionalism as a culture today?
Wow, what an interesting comment.
I have a lot of background in why I asked that question.
I can see it's a well thought out question, hence my giving it a moment to make sure it sinks in, Robert. Look, personally for me, professionalism is a culture, but it's also an output of culture.
Agreed.
Yeah. So it's not, I see that as a continuous cycle. Yeah. We need to have a culture of professionalism, and that means a certain behavior, a certain thought process, a certain way of approaching something. However, in being who we are, that creates professionalism as well, beyond just those functions.
It should.
So, right. So for me, for example, you can be professional, but you may not be authentic. So for me, authenticity is really important because it adds, you may be doing all the things that are professional, but if you're authentic and you're in the moment and you're emotionally available, that creates a depth which adds to professionalism, and yet, it's more from the inside out rather than the structure of professionalism. Is that a reasonable example to you?
It is. Can I extend the question a little bit? Having worked internationally, having worked in the US, having worked in Taiwan and in Europe, I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures, and what I have found is sometimes the culture of the country is not or does not mesh professionally.
Yes.
And I will give you an example.
Please.
I was working in Taiwan, and we had a change of president, and the new president was being rather rude to me. And I just looked at him, and he was Taiwanese, and as you know, Taiwan has a Japanese heritage associated with it, and he was old school. And I said to him, why are you, talking to me like that? What about my face? He said, you're a Westerner, you have no face. So, that's an example of taking the country's culture,
Correct.
but not aligning it. The man had no EQ at all, but not aligning it with a professional culture that we're discussing now.
Look, I totally agree, because and that's a great example. I mean, there are many countries where you've got a similar thing where the culture that is reflected in their business is not open to change, and it's not negotiable. And in that instance, you really, and it is case by case. So I love that you gave that example as a case, and I love what you said to him, because it made him, make a statement, in which case, if you have no face, you have nothing to lose. Therefore, he set the guidelines for how you can engage with him. And, I depending on who he was and how the vibe of the conversation was, I would say that. I would probably be tempted to say that. Thank you, sir. Because by saying that, then you've lifted the caution I had to not offend you. Because if I have no face, then I can't offend you. Therefore, I will speak openly. If that
should have spoken to you back then, because that's a brilliant answer.
Well, and this is where I'm talking about, is that if we're curious and we apply our curiosity to ourselves, what am I learning in this situation? What are the data points I'm gathering? What information is available for me that I can translate into some form of wisdom in this interaction? And you know what? I loved your question because it set it up. It brought everything into the open. The more things are in the open, the more you have a common understanding and a common view. Doesn't mean we have to agree, of course. Life's not about agreeing. But at least with a common view, we're able to connect. We're able to communicate, and from that, hopefully lead to some sort of outcome. So wonderful. And please, this is the sort of discussion that I think is of value, hopefully for the rest of you. I'm enjoying it, Robert. Thanks for the great example. But, I would encourage all of you, these are the sorts of conversations you want to have in your life if you're trying to expand. And you know what? Robert's a great guy. For many of you, if you know him, I've just met him, but he would make a great mentor for many of you early in your career. You want to be looking to people who have experience in life that you can ask questions of, be curious about. And I have many mentors. I was talking to one of my mentors, Robert, earlier today, he was 21 years anniversary for his company, and he's just turned 70. Youthful guy, great. And he goes, Ranil, I can't believe I've been in this industry 50 years. And, you know, he's inspiring. I mean, I rang to check on him because he was a bit down, energetic guy, Melbourne, you know, so constrained Jeff, yes. But you know, these become things that are about learning in life. And there's many things he's always telling to me. He goes, oh, Ranil, I always learn something from talking to you. And you know what? That will happen. The conversation is never one way. You're going to bring some uniqueness that if Robert was your mentor, he'd be saying, wow, that's wonderful, Lola. I hadn't thought of that. Because I can see he's a curious guy and he's willing to learn. And these are the traits you want to look at in your mentors. Some mentors will just be because of their experience. They may not have high EQ. They might not have high CQ. They just might have a lot of experience. They might have a lot of IQ. But I would encourage you to get a balance across the board. Sorry, Robert, I'm putting you in it a little bit there.
That's all right. That's all right, Ranil.
Great. So were there any other questions there, Lola?
No, there wasn't.
Okay, very good. So that kind of leads me into this, if I'll keep with this, how does it all fit together? So I'm going to ask a question, and I'd like you guys to sort of just put some chat notes in around EQ. You know, how familiar are you around what EQ means, and how familiar around exercising that are you? Because, you know, your success with CQ is going to depend on your success with EQ, because it's an extension. And you know what? This IQ thing doesn't matter so much for me, because IQ is a weird thing. It measures your ability to learn in a particular way. And there are many different ways to learn. So I don't emphasize this too much in my world, because ultimately, the more you can connect with people, the more authentic you are, the more authentic those connections are, and you can get to an outcome. And you don't have to be a genius, even though I suspect many of you are out there. You know, if we can have the same conversation from the cleaner to the CEO and create connection, then I think at a personal level, we've been successful. And, you know, I had a trading mentor once who told me, he goes, everyone always asks me, you know, what's your trading record? What's your percentage return? You know, how much are you doing? And his standard answer used to be 0+. And it used to throw them off. He goes, look, my aim is to always be at a 0%. And that means I'm not losing my money, and everything else is an upside. By the way, he was regularly multiple hundreds of % up year on year. So it wasn't as if he didn't know what he was doing. But that is also part of the humility that I saw him demonstrate a lot. So jump in and write some questions around your EQ, or what you perceive as being relevant and good when it comes to an approach around people. So this one here, SQ, this one I'd like to talk about, because at a personal level, SQ is about spiritual quotient. In other words, what do you believe in that's bigger than you? I'm not talking religious, I'm talking connection. You know, you may believe in science, so that may be energy and matter for you. You may believe in nature, so that could be something bigger than you that you're a part of. You may believe in the universe. If any of you have traditional beliefs around God or an entity, it could be around that. But ultimately, no matter what you believe, the physical scientific reality is that we're a component within components. We live in this world, we're waves and particles, we're a physical being in a physical world, energetic and otherwise. We're not isolated. And yet, many of us end up with this attitude that we are. So, what is your personal faith that you can surrender to? What is it that you can believe in, that you're a part of, and that you influence, and that influences you? Just like you have a cup of tea, you mix in sugar, you mix in milk, it's no longer the same. Well, we are similar in terms of our environment, and that's how we co-create our realities. So why is that important? Because you know what? Each group, irrespective of how big or strong, whether it's 2 of you or 1 of you in a function or a role or your own business, or whether you're part of, you know, 100,000 worldwide, countrywide, whatever. You're part of something, which is the function of that business. which is part of the world that it lives in. So there's a value, it's not even a web anymore. It's a value, what's it called? Planet? Value ball, I guess, 'cause it's multidimensional. You know, we spoke about value chains all those years ago. Then it became a value web. And really now it's three-dimensional. So this value ecosystem that we comprise in our businesses, whether it's our partners, whether it's our suppliers, whether it's our customers, whether it's their customers, whether it's the regulatory environment that they work in, whether it's the commercial environment they work in, this is the ecosystem that's the bigger part of your business culture. So how do you, as a business person, as a professional, within a group of professionals and business people and within an organization, relate to that greater consciousness that's your ecosystem? Because the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to create a vibe that adds value. Because, you know, in mergers and acquisitions, you talk about value accretion. In other words, how do you acquire businesses which create more value than the sum of the components? Well, we, in our business lives, are about value accretion if we take a spiritual, intelligent approach to it. So, you know, how can you buy this off me? And here we are sitting here in this cafe. So I'm going to order a coffee off you in this cafe. And, you know, it's more than you selling me the coffee. You know, as it happens, I may be working. So I'm affecting, you know, like happens with many road warriors, right? I can be on a Zoom call with many other people. I can be having a phenomenal coffee. I can be in this vibe, which is so good, and I'm feeling good. That's going to affect my business and the people I'm speaking to and their businesses. This is something bigger than each transaction. And the more aware of it that we are in ourselves and the effect we're having within that ecosystem, the more successful you're going to be. Now, how do you measure success? Well, the success initially for me is about authentic connections. And from authentic connections, it's going to be authentic communications and transactions, which then accrete value. Just because you bought something from me today, you know what? Because if we got on really well, you're going to buy a lot more from me and you're going to refer so much more, and I'm going to buy stuff from you, and we're going to have a great relationship, even though we may never end up being friends, but it's going to be an amazing thing, for example. And of course, from that place of authentic connection, usually it becomes more than just a pure business relationship anyway, because there is just that, an authentic connection. You may not talk to them here and there, but there's, you know, I had a call last week from a guy, and I dealt with him, oh gosh, last time I spoke to him was, I think, 23 years ago. So it's been a while. And he rang me up and he goes, Ranil, I saw you on LinkedIn. I go, hey man, I haven't heard from you in ages. What's going on? He goes, I just rang up to chat. You know, I'm doing this now. I'm doing that now. It was great what we did then. What are you doing? And we chatted for like 45 minutes and it was wonderful. And you know what? I don't know when we'll talk next, but it made my day. And to hear what he's doing and what he's done and what he's learned. And we shared a few stories like this about what could help. And away we went. To me, that was a wonderful example of a blessing. You know, if you talk about spiritual intelligence, that was a blessing to connect with someone, hear what's happened in their lives. I've got I learned quite a few things from him about what's happening in him in his industry. And I don't know what I'll do with that, but, you know, it was a good experience. So I'm curious, any questions, Lola?
There is two questions. There's one from Barsha, if Barsha would like to read out her question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lola. Very interesting conversation, Ranil, and I really like the fact that you focus so much on authenticity, and I think that's really great. And I believe in being authentic at work and connecting with people, but where do you draw a line? You know, like when you're connecting with people and having those authentic conversations, some people just whinge, and you're trying to empathize with them, and you do that on a regular basis, but then you kind of become this, you know, like they just dump things, so where do you draw the line because of the limited resources you've got at work, right? It's not your friend necessarily. where you would invest a lot more energy?
So look, what you're describing is thank you. That's a fantastic question, because what you're talking about now is boundaries. And being authentic is not mutually exclusive to having healthy boundaries. In fact, healthy boundaries is a big part of authenticity. So that example, which many of us, I'm sure, can really relate to, right? You try and help people, but oh my God, you're the most negative, whinging, whining, so-and-so. You're just driving me nuts. I've got to get the hell out of here, right? Okay, so that means if you go back to the example I spoke about before, what am I doing that's co-creating this experience that I'm in now? So you know what? I can be authentic and say to you, "Hi, Barsha, how you doing? How's your day?" "Oh God, it was a horrible weekend." But geez, I'm sorry to hear that. You know what? I got a new dog and we had all this fun. We were at the beach. It was so amazing. You know, this dog, okay, it weed a little bit here and there, but this damn thing walks in and jumps on the bed and gives me a cuddle, and I've forgotten that it's raining outside. "Oh yes, but I had such a horrible weekend." "You know, I'm sorry to hear that. Surely there must have been one good thing that you did. What did you have for dinner? Come on, there's going to be something. What was one good thing you did? What was something funny that happened? Did you watch a movie? What was it?" So, you know, I mean, think back to when simple rules, kids come home and you can ask them a few good things to focus their mind. Hey, what was something you enjoyed doing today? What was something funny that happened today? What was something that made you think that was really surprised you today? So that's about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is about creating different synapses in our brain and in our nervous system. And, you know, if people are stuck in a particular way, then you've got to, if you want to help them, and it can only happen from an authentic place, then it's not by vibrating down to their level. It's by giving them the opportunity to create a different vibration themselves. Whether they take it or not is up to them. They may decide never to talk to you because they'll go, "You're just a bloody hippie that wants to, you know, be happy all the time." And say, "Lala," you go, "Great, that's what I am. And you know what? I'm going to come by and be a hippie with you every now and then."
Great, thank you.
So, but so there's one thing I want to say to you, which, I mean, that was an example, but one thing I want to suggest to you to consider. If you find yourself in those situations, then we need to ask ourselves, what's the part in me that's invested in this? What is it that I feel like I need to get that's causing me to lower my vibration? Is it because I want to feel approval from this person? I want to be like, you know, really be very honest with yourself. This is where that self-curiosity is so important, because the insight you get will change who you are and how you are, and therefore the outcome in your life.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Did you say there was another one there, Lola?
There's two more. Since we're still on that topic of negative energy, Jeff has another question that if you'd like to ask that.
Yeah, okay. So actually my first question is probably more directed at Barsha, in that the person that's always whinging, that wouldn't happen to be a POM, would it? And so I suppose the follow-up question to that, Ranil, is that what if that negative energy is just part of a cultural norm? So, for example, we all know about the stereotype of whinging POM, right?
Yeah.
Is it culturally insensitive to dismiss these sort of attitudes as something negative? Or, you know, is it something that we have to somewhat sort of mold ourselves, you know, just become a whinging POM for a while just to fit in? And then, how does that go with the whole authenticity part of things?
So, Jeff, this is where, just like in everything in life, it's up to you. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's up to you to do some investigation and research. So, okay, let's use that example. So we understand that the English have a reputation to be whinging, but it's like the property market. There's no one property market. There's many, many components and separate markets within that. So do your research. Where is this person from? What are they about? Is that area really like that? Is that socioeconomic? Is that geographic? What is it? And why are they that way? And then align yourself to other vibrations within that group, because the English can also be dynamic. They can also be quite creative. They come from a phenomenal business environment. London is amazing, you know, if you think about it. So therefore, what are the nuances that you can take from there to create a resonance? Because it's about creating a resonance. I mean, every Englishman is not the same. English person is not the same, and yet they're able to work together. So how can you create a connection with them, which doesn't mean you compromise who you are, and as you say, lose that authenticity, and also go down to this vibe that really isn't healthy for you. That's what Barsha was talking about, right? She gets to a place, it's like, I don't want to be around you. What the hell's going on? But then I don't want to leave you in it because it'll affect me and my work and everyone in this environment. So, you know, I mean, dig a little bit. Put on your Inspector Sherlock Holmes hat rather than your Inspector Clouseau hat, you know, because we don't want to bumble into these things. But sometimes Clouseau has his spot, right? Some of these people sometimes can be broken down with humor. Maybe it's about cricket. Maybe it's about the West Indies. You have to be curious. And this is a great example of what I was talking about earlier, Jeff, that when we go in and say, why isn't this group adjusting to who I am and what I'm bringing? Well, what have I done to open that doorway? What have I done to create the linkages that allows me to lead them into my world, but also has them access, that gives me access to their world so I can learn how to meld that in. So, you know, that's a personal accountability. Does that kind of answer it, Jeff?
Right. Yeah, it's yes. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself.
Okay, cool. Lola, any more questions?
Yes, there's another question from Avi, if Avi is there.
Oh, yes. Hey.
Hey.
Interesting conversation. I like how you turned the situation around for the last question. So my question is more on the theory part. Looking at your slides earlier, CQ sounds quite similar to EQ about understanding, empathy, and like having that sensitivity. So does it mean that CQ is that diversity factor? And if so, does that mean that ethnic minority individuals already have that CQ compared to like probably the ethnic majority?
So let me address that last one first. I think ethnic minority people have the opportunity to embrace CQ probably more easily than someone who's who's part of a majority. And the reason I say that is there's momentum in a majority. It's like stopping a very large truck. It takes a bit of stopping. However, it depends entirely on the individual. I've got to tell you, I know minorities that are the most stubborn and with the lowest CQ and EQ of anyone I know. And they are ones with incredibly high IQ. And so the ego has stopped on, I'm so smart, I've got a double degree in engineering and law, I'm a PhD, I've come from this rich family. So to you guys, I'm going to be the boss in two weeks. So, I mean, that's not good from an EQ point of view, and culturally, from a CQ point of view, it's dead in the water. So I think there's opportunity with our circumstances, but it's about how individuals take that opportunity. How, you know, ultimately, I mean, this is my firm belief, life is about, you know, if you're open and you're curious and you can show a bit of humility, and humility, by the way, doesn't mean that we acknowledge our own strengths and our own achievements. It's not about going, oh, look at me, look at me. I mean, there's not a lot of humility in that. But you also have to acknowledge, hey, you know what? I did this and it was really successful, and I did that and I bombed out. You know, that's what it was. I learned more from the bombing out than being successful, actually. Funny about that. In this instance, the next time I did really well and that was successful and I bombed out and I got nothing out of it. So, Avi, I think my answer's the same, but it's actually what I believe 100%, individual responsibility. And sometimes with small groups, the culture can be very rigid and there's no way out of it. You know, so I'll give you an extreme example. Think of someone who comes from a cult. That way we're not insensitive to anyone on this call. If you're in a cult, you're told how to behave this way and this is the way it is your whole life. And it's very extreme. And you come out of it and most people can't adjust to the outside world. They still, you know, it's a big adjustment process to come out of that, the debriefing period. And it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of hard work and it takes, you know, a lot of discomfort. So if you apply that back to cultural groups, I would say the same thing. It's going to need a lot of courage. It's going to need a lot of humility. It's going to take hard work, and it's going to take some pain because we've got to break the eggs to make the omelette. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, I'm asking because there was once this guy just asked me on the street. He's African American, and we start having this conversation about being minority. And he was asking me, how do I feel being a minority? And how does he feel being a minority? And we just have this conversation at the street.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. How was that for you to have that with him?
Yeah, it just got me reflecting on that, because it just never occurred to me, like, how is it particularly this, I'm brought up this way, or like, am I different because of how society kind of mold me into this way? So we had the kind of conversation on that. Yeah.
And what you've just suggested there is a great way to expose yourself, be authentic with people in your environment. Hey, you know, I'm learning about this, but I've come from this society, but in our family, this is how we always did things. You know, this is my mum was like, this is my dad, and my brother's a, you know, an engineer for NASA now. And, you know, these are the things that, as we, rather than trying to interpret who we are and what we need to say, if we present them, then everyone can collaborate in that discussion. And that's what creates the connection and the learning as well. So I'm really happy to hear that example, because it made you think, and you took the opportunity to be introspective and actually think about it. And, you know, that's where the growth happens. That's neuroplasticity, when we can create different neural pathways in our brain. We can change the way we think. We can create new possibilities. Because I can guarantee you, as a result of that thought process, you will create new possibilities and new outcomes and interactions in your life, because you've just done one now. You've perhaps asked a question that you might not have asked in a forum that you may not have thought to ask it. But this will ripple through in your life, and it'll affect you in areas that you're not aware of. And a lot of the time, it'll also affect you in areas that you think you're doing well in. For example, with your family or your loved ones, you'll just start to be different, and it'll have an effect on them. So congratulations. I feel great to hear you having that sort of conversation walking down the street.
Thank you.
Lola, how are we doing? Any more questions?
There doesn't seem to be any more questions, but we have approached our Q&A session time. So if anyone does have any questions, then feel free to type them into the chat or just unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hey, so maybe I can talk about a few challenging scenarios. Robert, I was just looking at you, and I like that challenging one. So maybe I can think about, you know, some of probably the most challenging scenarios I've had have been internal, you know, with key execs who, for whatever reason, had a big chip on their shoulder or had a challenge with me in my role or me personally, you know, and
yes, I know very, very well.
I figured you would, you know. So, I mean, for me, you know, sometimes you've just got to know when to pull back and when to leave the situation and find a different way. And whether that's using someone else to do something, you know, I mean, and the quicker you do it, and with the more grace that you do it, the more respect they'll have for you, irrespective of whether they want to or not. So that would be my take on it. I mean, from when I was at uni all those years ago, one of the few things that I thought was very useful in my 4 years at university was I had a international finance teacher, and the guy used to have his own roofing business. He was a Canadian guy. And, you know, and he said this to us one day. He said, you know, this is the biggest rule in business that I would share with you and in life is know when to quit, know when to walk away.
Absolutely.
And he goes, I didn't do that and my business went bust. And you know what? I've always thought of that, and I've always remembered that of him. And I was very conscious in those meetings of going, okay, know when to walk away. What do we need to do, and how do we walk away from that? And that's got to be at multiple levels, both from an intelligence, you work out logically what needs to be done, from an emotional, you can feel the dynamic in this room and we're not going anywhere, or from a culture, this business is not interested in strategic growth. It's bunkering down the hatches. It's going through a consolidation phase. doesn't matter how good or what this is not what's going to happen. And that was the reason for my last exit from Telstra. It was fine. Strategic growth, M&A, we're not investing, we're not doing that. No problems. I've done some good stuff here. We've achieved some amazing things. There's stuff to do here, but that's not what I want to do. So thanks, it's been awesome. And away we go. Was that useful to any of you guys? Because I mean, these are just things that I'm thinking are interesting, that we can't consider CQ by itself. We can't consider EQ by itself. We can't consider IQ by itself. And if we're looking at all of those together, we've got to be very cognizant of this SQ piece. And if you start from that back, I think you won't go wrong, because it'll take you out of yourself, right? Most of us have a problem getting out of our own way. Our ego is too big, even when we think it's not. So if we can start from that big down, it always gives us some perspective.
Ranil, I couldn't agree more with what you said. And the one of the lessons that I learned a long time ago was you can learn from everybody, even how not to do something.
Wise word.
And when you take that and add all of these aspects that you've spoken about today, and add the fact that, you know, you can walk away with your head held high if it doesn't fit in with your values, then that's all you really need. Learn every day, and, you know, practice to be nice to people. I think in a nutshell, if I was to boil down everything you just said, is be nice to people.
Yeah, I love it. And you know, I think nice doesn't necessarily mean smile or pay them compliments. Nice means be authentic, be real. You know, people feel that, they appreciate that. You know, if you're having a shit day, you know, you can just say, you know what, it's been a crap day and I feel a little beaten down by it, but hey, tomorrow's another one, right?
I have a follow-up challenge, which I think follows on really nicely to this. Hopefully it doesn't take too much time. It's from my wife, who's a manager. And so she does have some pretty strong challenges. So, for example, she's in construction industry, actually. So she comes from quite a professional background. But definitely she does have a lot of challenges working with some of the blue-collar men, actually.
Of course.
And so there are cases where she's dealing with at the moment where, sometimes they can get quite personal, actually,
Sure.
and not be that professional, being very, very unprofessional, actually.
Of course.
So, wondering in these cases, just that resonated with, I've had to also give similar advice to know when to walk away. Especially when it could get very personal. That's excellent advice in those cases. But sometimes in these cases, when you do have to deal with people, you can't really walk away. So from her point of view, she's in more of this leadership position now as a manager.
Yes.
So wondering if you have any thoughts on how she has raised it with other people. So it's not just her dealing with these issues, it's other people in the company as well. But I guess she is in that leadership position now where it's kind of up to her on possible ways she could deal with this.
Look, that's a really good question. And obviously, I mean, you've shared some of that history and we don't have a lot. So I'm going to speak a little bit more generally, not knowing the specifics. But what I would suggest is this. Leadership isn't about having all of the answers. It isn't about doing everything, and it isn't about showing competency in every area to everyone. And it's always good when you have some sort of handicap as a leader. In this instance, everything you described is a handicap. But a handicap isn't a negative thing. What it means is that we have to create neuroplasticity about how we look at this environment. So, for example, who are within her organization, who can she identify as being potential leaders or leaders in development, or who are already seen as leaders by that workforce, particularly the problematic area of the workforce? Who do they respect? and how can she now start to influence them? Because this attitude would be cancerous to the entire work environment. Whether they align with it or not, they'll appreciate the impact on the business. And ultimately, this is where I was saying, when it's small, make it big. What's the spiritual impact of the way that work environment is? How successful is that business? How does it engage with its customers and suppliers? What does it do to the trading terms? What does it do to its profitability? And then what effect will that have back on the workers? So you know what, guys? We're going to get to a point where we're going to have to cut the workforce by 30%. You think it's not going to happen because we're winning projects? Guess what? Here are the challenges we're facing. What's our differentiated value proposition? How do we all own and encompass that? How do we all hold each other accountable? This guy is negative and abusive and is, misogynistic. Okay, you know what? I don't need to deal with him. My ego doesn't mean I have to do it. I just have to get this outcome. You know, Jeff, you're a strong guy. He respects you. You know what? As part of your development, what I'd like to do is give you some more leadership opportunity. Would you like that? Yes, I would. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is, this is this group of people. You get on well with them. Yes, I do. I get on great. Good. These are some of the messages we need to do. You know, they don't want to deal with me. You know what? I don't want to deal with them either. I'm not here to come and put up with this rubbish, but we need to get something done. How do we best make it happen? Pull a few people in a room, get them to collaborate and co-develop what's a successful way forward that you think. It's a hypothesis. Take your hypothesis and test it and test it and test it. Did it work this week, Jeff? What worked, what didn't? Hey, so Robert, you were in the room. What do you think? How do we make this work, right? Invest the time in co-developing a strategy that you can test and then pivot it. So in management strategy terms, those are the terminologies you'd be using. Obviously, you wouldn't use that with a construction worker because they'll probably throw something at you, if not pick you up and throw you out the window. So, you know, you've got to get that that language and vibe right so they don't think you're a wanker. Oh, sorry, excuse me. But you know what I'm saying, Sovan. Does that give you an idea, mate? You don't have to have the answers. What you want to do is get a diverse group of people who can contribute into what the best way forward is. And that's called the design approach to strategy. So take design thinking, move it into strategy, then it becomes strategic design and utilizing all of your resources for a new recipe.
Yeah, thanks. I think she's had a few chats with other people, but definitely hasn't gone to this collaboration stage. So I think that's a really good idea.
I would take it to that next level. Bring those people and ask them who else can help, because this is holding our business back. And you know what? I don't blame that person. That person, you know, for someone to be, I've had many jobs where I've gone and people go, I know what I'm doing, you should let me alone and just give me what I want and I'll do well, right? This is an example. And I've gone, okay. So first of all, you want me to give you autonomy? They go, yes, because I know what I'm doing, okay? So do you know what I'm going to hold you accountable for? Oh, but I've always done this. I said, yeah, that's great. But do you know what I'm going to hold you accountable for? No. Okay. So you don't know what the rules and parameters are. Do you know what skills you're going to need to deliver what I'm going to hold you accountable for? They go, well, I don't even know what you're going to hold me accountable for. How am I going to know if I have the skills? I said, great. So you don't know your competency levels. Do you have all the tools to deliver what I'm going to hold you accountable for? Well, again, I don't know, because what are you going to hold me accountable for? Great. So that's my job, right? Let me assess you to understand what's in my head. Do you have the tools? Do you have the competencies? Once you've got those things, I've done my job. Then you can be autonomous, because I've enabled you to use your autonomy for success. If not, I'm hanging you out to dry. Do you really want me to set you up for failure? They go, oh, okay. So I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm here to make you successful, because that's what's going to make me successful. And that's the sort of discussion that she should consider having with those people. So,
yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. Really good question. I love it. Hey, challenging environment. So just so you know, when I was in telecom, when I first became a manager there, so I had sales guys that have been 35, 40 years in Telstra, from telecom, being a liney, knew it all, you know, weren't interested in this dark-skinned young guy who had a chip on his shoulder because he was full of energy, being their boss. You know, they thought it was the bloody most ridiculous thing out. And I don't drink, so we'd go to the pub and I wouldn't even have a beer with them, you know, and I wouldn't eat anything because I'm vegetarian and they're having fish and chips or a steak or something. So I was right out there, you know. I get a sense of how she must be feeling.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Any other questions?
There is one more question, but also very conscious of the time. So if anyone does have to leave, then I just wanted to say thank you for joining this and just to follow us on our social media pages. But the last question was sent by Jeff again. So would you like to ask your question? Quite an interesting question. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, there's a button down there. Yes, okay, so thanks for that, Ranil. I'm just aware of the time, but this is a question that you kept mentioning this term neuroplasticity, which I really like this idea. The problem with it is that in the modern world, I have a feeling, or this is my gut feel, that people are actually becoming less neuroplastic, I suppose, if you could use that, if that's even a word. And the reason is because social media has been feeding us, through the algorithm stuff that we want to see, which basically gives us stuff that we already think about. So basically, if you already believe in this stuff, it will feed you more of that because that's the content that you watch. And so we're almost seeing people digging into, whatever it is, whatever prejudice, whatever belief that they have, just getting that way. So unfortunately, I think in terms of your CQ, your cultural intelligence, that is certainly not the way to increase your neuroplasticity. I can't say that word, but I just can't see. MP, okay. So I just can't see how in this modern world, people will naturally become much more MP. So how do you combat that in your everyday life to ensure that you have growth on your cultural intelligence?
Okay, really, really cool question, Jeff. So I'm going to bring it back to what you said right at the end. How do I do that in my everyday life? So neuroplasticity is about the function of not only our brain, but our nervous system, and hence our physiology. So, for example, what hand is your preferred hand, Jeff?
Right hand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you do anything with your left hand?
Yes.
What do you do?
I play basketball.
Okay. So how about I suggest if for 2 minutes every morning for the next week, first thing you do when you sit at your desk is you take your left hand and you start writing something. Now, by doing that, you're doing something that's different to your system and you're creating neuroplasticity. There's a whole range of exercises you can do which start to activate different components of the brain in different ways. As simple as, okay, forget the exercises. Okay, so I always make tea and drink tea out of my right arm. You know what? I'm going to put it on the left-hand side and I'm going to do it from that side.
See, but you're assuming people are already aware. You see, what if people don't know what they don't know, right?
Well,
if you're being fed something,
do is know what they know, Jeff. So you know your routines. You don't have to know what you don't know. Just know what you know and then make a choice to do something exactly the opposite of that. So I call that a 180, right? So, Jeff's talking and I want to say, you're an idiot. You know what? 180. Don't say that. Say, Jeff, you know what? Part of me doesn't want to believe you, but I'm going to keep listening because I really want to walk out right now. Do exactly the opposite. That is breaking a chain in the way we're thinking and translating to action. And so you're right. Social media pulls us full of junk. You know what? Jump onto YouTube. Listen to podcasts of things which are not things you would normally listen to. Joe Rogan, I love him, right? Because he has such a variety of people on there. And Valuetainment, I love him, yeah? So again, these are the guys that have different interests, anywhere from mixed martial arts to neurobiology, through to medicine, through to all sorts of things. Saturate your senses with very different things and increase your curiosity about things that you wouldn't be interested in. That creates neuroplasticity. And you know what? After a while, you'll start to find Facebook and all of these things start to send you different things because you're so curious about other things. It's not so narrow anymore. The very thing that was holding you back in a prison starts to create more neuroplasticity for you because you've trained yourself and then start training it inadvertently.
Yep.
And that's entirely personal. It's entirely up to us. We can do it or we can say we can't do anything, and that's the way it is. Both can be a reality. We just have to decide which one's ours.
Absolutely. So you have to be absolutely intentional about it.
Intentional and aware, correct. And this gets back to, in our circle, we were at the middle of it, right? IQ, EQ, CQ, none of it matters. It's a personal choice. It's only there to the extent that we make the choice and then we take action. Everything is action. Even if it's the same, even if it's to, instead of having the coffee every morning, I'm having a herbal tea now. You know, maybe it's once a week on a different day. But what is it that I'm doing that's new and different and creates a different experience for me? Someone asked me this and they said, yeah, but how about getting dressed? You know, I put one leg in my pants at a time. How can I change that? I said, well, funny, I can put both legs on at the same time. You know, I just roll back on the bed and pull them both up. And they thought I was an idiot. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, do I really care? Do something different. Do something where no one can see you. It's you and your experience that matters, right? Thanks, Avi. I love you can laugh with me about me.
Okay, so Ranil, I think we have to finish up because we're a bit over time. But did you have any final words that you'd like to say?
No, look, I mean, thanks for everyone attending. I hope you got something out of today. Be curious, continue to ask questions, and continue to consider that irrespective of what you think you may know about any topic in any environment, there's probably many things you don't. So instead of saying something, maybe ask something and see what comes up.
Okay, so that concludes today's webinar. I wanted to thank Ranil for taking out the time to share with us his experiences and insight on the topic. I thought it was really good, and I hope everyone else found value from that. And I also wanted to thank the PDF team for making this webinar all possible. And also thank you all for joining us here tonight and engaging in the conversation. If you enjoyed this session, we have more webinars in store for you. So on the 30th of July, we will be hosting one with Robert Hasari. He's actually in the audience tonight, and he's an expert at connecting with people from different industries, as he has worked in many managerial roles in Australian and international companies, including the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia for New South Wales and ACT. And so he will be discussing how to strengthen your network and build your online presence. And a link to the registration page will be provided in the chat box below. We also have amazing podcasts and videos that you can watch. So follow us on all our social media pages and also subscribe to our newsletters on our website to keep updated with everything. And so again, thank you everyone for joining tonight and have a good night.